Okay? No. You know, so, uh, uh, you know, yeah,
This was my voice. My real voice. They ended up giving us the old stuttery voice boxes because, a lot of the employees got their vocal cords shredded up in spring lock failures. I'm glad Roger gets to meet you too, sir. Me, I mean. I wasn't an astroscientist or anything all that interesting. Nobody working at Freddy's was, really. Maybe it'll be easier to understand if I give you a little history lesson. Alright then. I mean, you asked, after all. First phone guy produced was a guy named Scott Coffin. As in, that was the name he was born with. The first and only true Scott Coffin. The founder of our little company. The company was heartbroken when he died on the job. An accident while performing in a Freddy suit is what got him. This was before springlock suits were adapted from our competitors over at Fredbear's. He hit his head on a table and bled out. When he passed, it felt like a piece of Freddy's had died. The remaining 5 managers would have given anything to have him back. And they did. Some nutjob named Dr. Miller wrote a thesis on metal having a life force. The joy of creation. That same guy also patented the springlock, interestingly enough. Anyway, at that point, the company had just bought an old workshop by the name of Afton Robotics, and, well, I guess they figured if the machine could stitch fabric together, it could do the same with flesh, right? They got the remaining 5 Freddy's managers in to discuss and thus design the perfect manager. Strict but friendly, able to make and take calls from his own head, endearing and just the right amount of lovable. The company wanted to create staff that were just as recognizable as the characters. Come down to any Freddy's location and meet Scott. He runs the place. They eventually finished the Scott Memorial Machine, which turned employees into living phone people. Here's a picture of Scott. Model 0101. He didn't last long. Technology was crude, and customers could tell he was suffering. The company put him out of his misery. We couldn't bear to see the man who gave Freddy's life in such pain. Think of him as Generation Zero, the black sheep of phone guys. They tried to reprogram the robotic AI of the first generation to be more like him, the dedicated employee he was when he was still alive, but of course that came with a million unforeseeable kinks. And no, I'm not talking about Fox kinks. Souls and memory can be tricky stuff. Overriding one mind with another, it's not pretty. Their image of the kind of person Scott Coffin wasn't really a fleshed-out person. It wasn't natural. Only the most dedicated phones survived this process and became functioning phone guys. I think the company got sick of the headaches that the Generation 1 phones gave us and decided to dull the AI next generation. Let the old brain work in tandem, That led to workers remembering a little bit too much, though, and trying to reconnect with their own lives, so for Generation 3, they just didn't reprogram us at all. They told us who we were now, and what would happen if we tried to run, trained us a little, and told us to get to work. So, that's how I remember everything. Sure, they may have put my skull and brain into a phone head, but, my mind's the same as it's ever been, aside from a healthy helping of trauma. With all due respect, I worked at Freddy's, sir. I was 34. I was divorced, dropped out of college, lost my apartment, and my dog must be dead at this point. There isn't anything for me to go back to. I don't want to be Roger anymore. Roger's a drunken lout whose wife left him and couldn't finish med school. Scott Coffin is a manager at the last remaining Freddy's location. The founder of the company, the man who started it all. Scott Coffin is the very definition of what an ideal manager is. The definition of an ideal person. Scott Coffin was a man who the company loved so much, they literally did the impossible to bring him back. Nobody ever loved Roger that much. Nobody even noticed when Roger went. The company loved Scott so much that they spent 20 years straight trying to bring him back. I'd much rather be Scott Coffin than Roger, sir. This is home.